Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry. Today's video is part 3 of my most recent state of the game. In part 1 I looked at the preview information we got about Eastern Emissaries and the New Year's raid. In part 2 I talked about everything that happened in 2018 as far as events go and showcases go, and then gave my 2019 hopes, and those are time-stamped on that video, so if you want to skip straight to those, feel free to check that out. But for part 3 of this, I'm going to talk about Chapter 7 and talk about the story as a whole. Haven't really made a video going into the main campaign of the game, so I just want to warn you there will be some spoilers today if you haven't already cleared the story. But I decided to go ahead and re-record this because at the time I had recorded it, I hadn't played any of the New Year's stuff yet, and a lot has happened in that time. I've developed a little bit more thoughts on the story, and I want to wrap in the story as a whole and not just Chapter 7. So overall, I feel like Chapter 7, though, was okay. It took quite a while to come out. It took about 3 months since the game launched, and I was expecting a little bit more. Now, as far as gameplay goes, there are 14 maps here. So that is sizable, that's nice, but it's the story that I felt things were a bit short. Now, the main focus of this story was Yuden and the gang going over to Saint Latier to try to form an alliance in their quest to thwart the Diurnell Empire and protect New Alberia. The coolest thing for sure was getting some backstory on Ronzel, in my opinion, at least for the first half of this chapter, because something very cool does happen at the end. And we found out that Ronzel's father, Zacharias, is essentially the head of Saint Latier. So Ronzel is a noble person who perhaps made some mistakes or had disagreements with their father in his youth, and then left Saint Latier. So there was some nice dialogue there, but overall I feel like what was teased is not exactly what we got. Because at the end of Chapter 6, there was a preview card with a picture of Ferris, one of Yuden's older siblings, and I was really hoping that we'd get a lot more exposition on him this chapter. He would be sort of the main antagonist, but instead, once we got to the end, it was mostly Emil that we were dealing with yet again. And I'd love to see less of Emil and more of the other siblings, because I just think they're more interesting characters. They're more mysterious for sure. We don't know a lot about them. But from a gameplay standpoint, let me go ahead and get into one of these maps here, and Eleonora is going to be our guide today. We'll go ahead and bring along a Lowen for healing in case we need it. From a gameplay standpoint, I do think that if you've been playing this game since the beginning, your characters are already probably quite strong. So you shouldn't expect too much of a challenge from this. But the good thing is the difficulty of this I think is set in sequence with the story. So if you're new to the game or you only care about the story and maybe came back for Chapter 7, then you might actually find this kind of challenging. And for the first half of maps, I was a little bit disappointed because they do seem a bit cookie cutter, like very similar to Chapter 2. But it was in this final part that these actually look kind of different with the ruins, these pillars that fall down and inflict stun. It does look like something that we see in the elemental ruins, but I was pretty pleased with these final 2 maps, and the EX maps were also okay. Definitely took a lot of cues from Chapter 6, and just like Chapter 6, this chapter features 2 element types, mostly water, but also there's a smattering of wind enemies that will show up, and there's some more ailment resistance that you have to deal with, or afflictions that might come into play, because these pillars inflict stun if they hit you, and there are also some wind raptors here that can stun you if they hit you. I think one inherent limitation on the map design is the fact that everything has to be played in co-op. So ultimately there kind of has to be a maximum length on these maps, because it's kind of impractical to expect someone to maintain a connection for a very long time for a more dungeon-like map. So even though I liked, say, the lock and key mechanic or the lock and door mechanic in Chapter 5, I kind of understand why that wasn't taken further and isn't a big thing in every chapter of the story. As an enfranchised player, even on hard, this wasn't a super challenging new piece of content for me. That's not the main thing I took away from it. It was definitely the story. Now, as far as world building, I actually kind of liked the fact that we got to see Saint Latier. It kind of reminded me of Game of Thrones and sort of felt like Bravos or something like that. We also got some Game of Thrones type political intrigue, but certainly to a lesser extent, nothing on that caliber. The other thing that reminded me of that series was probably the highlight in the second half of this chapter, and that was when we found out that Ferris has a condition called Dragon Scale. Maybe it's not properly described as a condition, it might be an intentional augmentation that he's done, but he was able to deflect an attack by Ronzel essentially with his bare hands. That is a bit of lore that we have never heard anything about. Now, the one thing that was kind of disappointing though, like I said, was Ferris seemed to be the primary antagonist, and it almost felt like the story just ended at the halfway point for me. Like, that would have been a great midway point for this chapter, and I would have wanted to see even more. So in terms of the long-term perspective on the story, this does make me feel a bit different about the pacing. I previously thought that we were likely to wrap up the defeat of the Diurnal Empire within like 10 chapters or maybe 11 chapters. But now, the way they're doing this, where we just got a peek at Ferris, which probably means there will be another chapter with Ferris where we actually confront him. I actually think it's going to be quite a while before we get to that point and finish this main arc of the story. So, here we go against this boss. I actually think we'll just show you the arena here. I mean, there's a good number of enemies. Like, this will be challenging if you are a newer player or if you bring a lower level team or have lower level facilities. But I'm going to go ahead and concede. I don't want to waste the stamina here since I've already beaten this. And I'll show you just one more map as I talk about the story as a whole. I've talked about this a little bit in my summoning video with Eastern Emissaries coming out. But what seems the most promising for me in the game is the possibility of going to future regions. So something like going to Hinamoto, going to a new continent for Book 2 once we wrap up our defeat of the Diurnal Empire, that bodes really well for me. It excites me that this world has a lot of richness, a lot of backstory and lore. As far as loose ends go, I feel like there are a number of things just in the first part of the story too that we haven't really gotten addressed. So one of them that comes to mind is Elisand's assassin companion or frenemy, the person who was chasing after her earlier in the story. I expect that to eventually come up, and just like how this chapter focused on Ronzel, we'll probably get one that deals more with Elisand. Then we'll probably get one that deals more with Cleo, because a lot is still unknown about her relationship with Alberius, the founder of Alberia. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. In terms of other loose ends, though, there are a number of other things, too. Yuden has a fifth sibling, an older sibling. I should say that's the fifth heir to the throne. We don't know who that is. We don't really know much about Aurelius's wife or, the queen. Potentially there are multiple mothers involved. We don't really know anything about the parents of these different offspring of Aurelius. So that's one thing. We don't know about Chthonius, where Chthonius disappeared to. That is the sixth Great Worm after Alberius founded the kingdom, and essentially the other Great Worms kind of weakened in power, went into slumber, effectively. I'm getting a little bit of that loosely wrong, probably. I'm kind of hand-waving that, but we don't know much about Chthonius. We don't know much about Ilia and Elysium. Ilia was the first Auspex, and Elysium was really the strongest dragon in history. This was way before Alberius was even around. And Morsayati. Morsayati is the demon who challenged essentially Ilia and challenged the whole world. And Ilia and Elysium came together to try to confront that demon. So there are a lot of bits of information, bits of lore that are going to hopefully be woven into the story, even as new things are introduced, like that dragon scale, and like the soul packs that came with the New Year's Tidings raid. That is super promising to me. I'm hopeful that it'll get developed more, like I've said. And besides that, one of the things I really appreciate about Dragalia Lost is this whole post-apocalyptic aspect of it. And we got to see that in this very chapter with these ruins, where we're kind of interacting with this ancient weapon. And this was previewed before the game released, so maybe you didn't read this on the website, but the reason that dragons and humans were in conflict was humans were very involved with technology. We almost had like a steampunk level of technology in this world, but dragons gained their mana and their power through the natural order of things. And so as dragons basically saw this technology taking over, they wanted to challenge it. They wanted to be able to restore their power and not lose out on that. So that is kind of what led to this big conflict that essentially destroyed the world or led to the recreation of the world. So I am super hopeful that we'll get to see more of that in the future. As far as the rest of the story goes, I can't think of too much else to add. Chapter 6 is probably still my favorite of all time. I think Valix was a great character. We saw him throughout the chapter, unlike Ferris. And our preview for Chapter 8, it looks like we'll be seeing Leonidas next, and that will be a flame-focused chapter. So that's pretty cool. I'm looking forward to that. I do hope that Chapter 8 releases a little bit sooner, so hopefully around February, instead of how we had to wait several months for Chapter 7. As you can see, I've completed it on hard as well. The rewards are still good for this. If you're new to the game, I definitely think, since you're going to get a lot of stamina refreshes as you level up, it is worth playing through the story. You're going to get free characters, you're going to get a lot of Wormite. So I do recommend that. That's most of what I want to say on the story. I will add one little update on New Year's Tidings Fortune from Afar. I talked about how good this is to farm, and as you can see, I have a lot of emblems. I posted on Twitter a picture of all of the rewards that I've gotten that are special, but I'm actually going to start farming the beginner mode because I think that from a practicality standpoint, and unfortunately with a lot of people quitting and so on, it is very time consuming to farm expert. So beginner, if you look here, it still has these valuable reward drops, and there's no published information about the rates, but we do know pretty much in every mode they are low. So you're pretty much playing for a chance at these, but it is low. Just keep that in mind, but from a practicality standpoint, since I can defeat this on my own, I kind of want to do this just to test it out and because it's going to be easier to play. And also with dailies, I thought I would be skipping all my dailies. That has not happened. When I wake up with this double stamina, the practical dump for them is to auto-battle a lot of these daily maps, the avenues, ruins. So I do suggest probably, practically speaking, you're going to want to do those, even if the raid has those rewards. But anyway, everyone, that's going to do it for my discussion of the story. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that the event is going good for you, and I hope that you've been enjoying the story. Give me your thoughts. Let me know how you feel about it, the direction. Do you want more of it? What do you want to see more of? I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments below. Otherwise, take care everyone, and I'll see you next time.
I am Ieyasu of Hinomoto, and I am here to grant you my aid.